12,800 and 11,600 years ago, truly global cataclysmic events involving rapid rises in sea level.
Yeah.
A wall 80 times taller than the Great Wall of China in the Siberian wilds. The line alone stops you cold. A mountainside that looks assembled, blocks that seem too precise, a cutout that resembles an entrance, details that spark more questions than answers. Today, we follow the trail the way stories are often found, in whispers, in images, in places so remote they feel like another age. No verdicts, no hard lines, just a guided walk through what's been said, what's been seen, and what keeps pulling people back to a ridge where stone looks like intention. Whispers in the mountains. For as long as people have ventured into the deep Siberian ranges, stories have drifted out of the wilderness like smoke. Hunters, hikers, and passing researchers have returned with tales of landscapes that seem to resist simple explanation. They talk about stones that don't just tumble randomly, but appear aligned, almost as if they had been arranged into long stretches. They mention ridges that run so straight, so unnaturally consistent, that they could be mistaken for walls. From a distance, entire mountain faces look squared, their sharp edges cutting the skyline like the outline of fortifications. These aren't just rocks scattered by chance, the whispers say. They're echoes of something intentional, something vast that lingers across the land. What makes the region so captivating is the silence that wraps itself around these formations. It is not the ordinary hush of an isolated forest, but something heavier, more deliberate. Travelers who reach these outcrops often describe a strange stillness, as if the mountains themselves are holding back a story. The air carries no obvious markers of danger, yet it weighs differently on those who step closer. The cliffs loom not simply as geology, but as monuments, vast slabs of granite and stone that stand with a kind of presence. They rise like guardians, each edge almost too clean, too perfectly balanced against the horizon to be dismissed as coincidence. In such a place, it is easy for the mind to wander, if not to builders, then to forces beyond understanding. Some explorers recall moments when they felt dwarfed, not just by the size of the landscape, but by a sensation that they were walking through an abandoned hall rather than open terrain. Massive boulders, each the size of houses, appear in positions that seem curated, as if someone had carefully chosen where to set them down. It is this arrangement, this eerie suggestion of design, that unsettles even the most pragmatic observers. These aren't small curiosities of erosion, but shapes so large and so precise that they cast doubt on what should be expected from natural stone. When silence and scale combine, the imagination starts filling in the missing pieces. Then there are the photographs, grainy or crisp, distant or close. They carry the same power to stir curiosity. A shot taken at the right angle makes a vertical seam look like the corner of a tower. A shadow caught at dusk transforms an ordinary crack into the outline of a gate. Some images make cliffs appear as stacked blocks, layered so neatly that the eye rebels against the idea of random chance. Once a picture is released online, it takes on a life of its own, replicated, discussed, magnified. Each repost adds new captions, new numbers, new theories. Before long, the original mountain is far away, and what remains is a collective picture of architecture hidden in stone. It is this tension between what is seen and what is suggested that keeps the whispers alive. Siberia is remote, largely inaccessible, and shrouded in extremes of climate. Few people will ever stand at the base of these formations, and even fewer will study them with tools and measurements. Instead, what filters out are impressions, a hiker's astonishment, a photo's illusion, a rumor retold by someone who swears the stones look too deliberate. These fragments don't settle the mystery, they amplify it, layer by layer, until the land itself feels like a riddle. And from these whispers among the peaks, the trail winds toward Shoria, where the stone itself begins to look like stacked in tension. Shoria's carved-looking peaks. The mountains of Shoria rise like something out of an unfinished blueprint. When people first look at photographs of the region, what strikes them most are the shapes. The granite surfaces don't resemble the irregular scatter of stones most expect from natural ridges. Instead, they almost mimic architecture. There are right angles that look too sharp to be accidental, seams that run like lines of mortar, and faces that meet as if two blocks were fitted side by side. In some images, the entire mountain gives the impression of a colossal wall, tier upon tier of stones stacked like the work of an ancient builder. That is why so many who encounter these pictures instantly use the same word: megalith. The mountain doesn't just look large, it looks constructed. Up close, the impressions deepen. Travelers who reach the Shoria formations often report the strange details that can only be noticed when your boots are on the ground and your hands can feel the surface of the rock. Some describe their compasses misbehaving near certain faces of stone. A needle that should remain steady suddenly trembles, as if refusing to point north in the presence of the blocks. Around some edges, the rock seems to have been stressed or altered. Accounts mention surfaces that appear scorched or fused, as though exposed to intense heat at some point in their long history. Others recall areas that feel unnaturally smooth, with broad swathes of granite polished in a way that doesn't fit with the surrounding jagged landscape. Around campfires, these details become stories, strange murmurs of technology, energy, or long-lost effort impressed into the mountain. Whether these impressions are exaggeration, misinterpretation, or something else entirely, they become part of the fabric of the site's reputation. The most disorienting element, however, is scale. Human eyes are used to reading shapes in relation to familiar reference points: a window, a doorway, a person standing nearby. When someone stands next to the Shoria blocks, the scene transforms. What was once a jagged ledge suddenly looks like a lintel over a doorway. A dark shadow in a seam appears to be the cut line between two fitted stones. A cliff face photographed from just the right angle takes on the look of stacked blocks rising in layers, as if a hidden city wall had been discovered in the middle of the Siberian wilderness. At these scales, every crack and shadow seems purposeful. The mountain is no longer a ridge, but a massive assembly, with each detail reinforcing the illusion of deliberate construction. Once shared through photos, these illusions gain even more power. Images capture the angles that feed the imagination, and when passed along without context, they take on lives of their own. One photo shows a hiker dwarfed by a wall of stone. Another highlights a seam that looks precisely cut. Another captures the straight edge of a granite slab that seems almost engineered. Together, these fragments create a mosaic of mystery. Viewers start to see blueprints where none exist, stories of ancient hands in the cold stone of a mountain. The more they look, the harder it becomes to dismiss the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, these ridges weren't entirely the work of wind, frost, and time. The Shoria peaks stand as both natural wonder and canvas for human imagination. They embody that place where geology and storytelling overlap, where cracks and shadows grow into the foundations of myths. Every visitor, every photograph, and every late-night story adds another brushstroke to the image of a mountain that reads less like nature and more like memory etched into stone. And once you've seen it that way, it is nearly impossible to unsee. But then the path leaves the cliff and follows a quieter line, down into the grass, where shapes hide not in height, but underfoot, tracks beneath the turf. When most people imagine a wall, they picture towering stonework that dominates the horizon. But on certain Siberian slopes, the story unfolds in quieter shapes, low ridges and shallow rises that blend into the grass until you learn how to look for them. Reports describe parallel lines etched into the land, faint but persistent. Some are linked like berms, others stretch like corridors rather than fortresses. They don't roar their presence, they guide it. Instead of barriers meant to overwhelm, these earthworks suggest funnels and pathways, subtle tools designed to control movement rather than resist it outright. You wouldn't notice them from afar, but once pointed out, the pattern repeats too consistently to dismiss. To those who take the surveyor's path, the ground itself becomes a manuscript layered with half-erased writing. Specialists have walked these slopes with equipment that doesn't care for appearances. Probes are driven into the soil to measure resistance. Seismic waves are tapped into the earth to see what reflects back, and the results sometimes reveal faint signatures that don't belong to random geology. Beneath what looks like ordinary pasture, a system sketches itself, lines hidden under turf, corridors hinted at just below the roots. These impressions don't declare themselves boldly. They appear faintly, like pencil lines that have been rubbed but not erased. In repetition, though, they persuade. Here was once something constructed, something meant to divide, direct, or contain. The landscape remembers, even when eyes can no longer see. Time does not treat barriers kindly. What once stood proud becomes folded back into the hills, leaving only traces. A ridge cut by a highway, a mound bisected by a village road, or a wall reduced to a swelling in the ground, all are reminders of how human effort is undone by seasons. Grass thickens, soil slides, and snow presses the outlines flatter each year. Yet the impression remains, suggestive enough that locals still point with their whole hand, indicating where a line runs even if nothing obvious is visible. For them, the ridges are not gone. They are simply covered. Stories passed down often fill the gaps left by stone. Villagers will speak of places where the ground feels different underfoot, where plowing turns up shapes too regular to be chance, where the earth resists in bands as if holding a memory of something larger. These oral hints, tied with what surveyors map, weave a narrative of corridors and boundaries stretching across slopes that today look ordinary. When travelers walk here unaware, they see only meadow and hillside. But with guidance, those same walkers begin to notice curves that repeat, berms that run parallel, outlines that hum with intention. The life cycle of a barrier is cruelly short when measured against the age of mountains. Yet it stretches long across human memory. A rampart that once forced travelers into a narrow path now lies flattened under turf, but the shape lingers. Modern construction has carved away sections, villages have sprawled over the lines, and still, with the right light, the ridges reappear. They are reminders that even when physical walls vanish, the echo of boundaries can remain etched in the ground. There's something quietly haunting about these slopes. Unlike the towering cliffs of Siberia that seize attention with dramatic forms, these ridges whisper their story. They invite patience, interpretation, and imagination. They don't announce themselves with grandeur, but they persist like scars, shallow yet undeniable. Step back far enough, and the land begins to resemble a palimpsest, a manuscript written, erased, and rewritten by both people and nature over centuries. And if the slope can draw a line, the stone can draw a story, especially where an opening seems to wait at the base of a face. Bones, blasts, and legends. In a land as vast and forbidding as Siberia, the unusual becomes part of the everyday vocabulary. One discovery, one fragment of bone, can rewrite entire pages of human history. That happened in a cave tucked into the region's cold heart, where a single toe bone revealed the existence of a branch of humanity no one had suspected. The Denisovans, as they came to be known, expanded the family tree overnight, forcing us to reconsider who had walked these lands and when. In the same way, one morning in the taiga left its mark forever. A blast so powerful it flattened millions of trees, yet left no crater to explain itself. The Tunguska event remains one of the greatest mysteries of the modern age. In this corner of the world, anomalies move like weather systems, unpredictable, sometimes devastating, always reshaping the memory of the people who live beneath them. And memory here behaves differently. It doesn't flow in straight lines. It meanders, gathering silt and stories the way rivers gather soil. Songs carry tales of towering figures, people who stood taller than ordinary men, building cities now lost to sight. Maps drawn centuries ago mark settlements no longer visible, with boundaries that vanish as easily as smoke in wind. Legends of vanished builders whisper from generation to generation, often tied to specific stones or ridges. Each story has its variations, like a river branching and rejoining, but the core remains. Something greater, something older once stood here, and its traces remain scattered across the land. What makes these stories so enduring is the way the landscape itself seems to invite them. When a cliff face looks like masonry, the imagination supplies the builder. When a block seems too heavy to have fallen by chance, a vanished giant must have placed it there. This is the constant in human thinking. Intentionality. We look at a landscape and cannot help but project our own logic of design upon it. The older the formation, the deeper the erosion, the more deliberate it seems to become in our minds. We tell ourselves that someone must have meant it, that it wasn't just the patient hand of time, frost, and tectonics. The mountains appear ancient, and so we imagine ancient hands to match. The stories spread in rhythm with the seasons. During the long winters, they grow in warmth by the fire, exaggerated with every telling. In the brief summer months, travelers stumble upon ridges and stones that give them just enough evidence to carry the legends further. A rectangular opening in the rock can become a doorway for forgotten beings. A flat-topped ridge might transform into the ruins of a citadel in the collective imagination. These narratives carry a power that logic alone struggles to dispel. They are not just diversions. They are explanations crafted by generations who lived in a land where the extraordinary always seemed to lurk just beyond the tree line. The Denisovan bone proved that unknown branches of humanity can remain hidden until chance uncovers them. The Tunguska blast proved that a single event can bend the world to its knees without leaving an easy answer. Against this backdrop, it is no wonder that legends of builders, giants, or lost cities find fertile ground. Siberia is a place where anomalies are not the exception, but part of the environment. Every discovery, every unexplained event, every oddly shaped stone fuels the cycle of speculation. And whether those stories are true or not, they become inseparable from the land itself, rooted as firmly as the pines that cover it. which is why a rectangle in rock feels less like a crack and more like a threshold someone once stepped through. Doorways in stone. Near the base of certain ridges, there lingers a shape that arrests the eye more than any sprawling wall or towering cliff. It is not grand in scale, nor does it overwhelm the skyline. Instead, it is precise in a way that feels deliberate. A rectangular impression sits cut into the rock, edges sharper than chance usually allows, lines clean enough to tug at the imagination. It looks like a passage, but refuses to fully become one. Too shallow, too irregular, too rough around the borders. Yet still, it plants the idea of entry. It is a puzzle box without hinges, a doorway without a frame. The kind of detail that pries open the mind and keeps it wondering long after you've stepped away. The pull of such a shape lies in its versatility. Humans have always used what nature provides, bending landscapes into tools rather than starting from scratch. A natural bastion becomes a lookout, its vantage commanding the valley below. A narrow gap is walled and turned into a gate. A ledge that hugs the cliff morphs into a path with little more than footsteps and repetition. It doesn't take colossal effort to create function out of form. Often, it only takes recognition, seeing possibility in what already exists. And that rectangular impression, lodged in stone, embodies that principle. It doesn't have to be man-made to feel useful. It doesn't have to be engineered to suggest function. The very fact that it looks like an entrance allows the mind to assign it purpose. This is the power of inheritance in landscapes. Not every wall must be built from the ground up. Many of the world's most enduring strongholds, fortresses, and shelters began as features already offered by the terrain. People inherit and adapt. They see a crevice and imagine a doorway. They see a plateau and imagine a floor. They see a sheer face softened by a single ledge and imagine steps rising toward the summit. The stone of Siberia may have provided the impression, but people, through story, through speculation, gave it meaning. That is often how history begins, not with architects laying blueprints, but with communities recognizing opportunity in what the land whispers to them. And then there is the magnetism of almost. The doorway is not perfect. The corners do not meet with the precision of a mason's chisel. The edges lack the polish of hands smoothing stone. Yet the shape hovers on the edge of intentionality, just close enough to be convincing, and just ambiguous enough to resist certainty. It is almost a lintel, almost a joint, almost a wall. And in that almost, it holds more power than a clear answer ever could. Certainty closes doors. Ambiguity keeps them open. A clear gate would be a fact. An almost gate is an invitation. This is why such formations endure in the imagination long after footsteps fade from the scree. Photographs capture them. Stories embellish them. Legends grow around them. Travelers return with tales of the door in the rock, and those who hear them carry the image further, layering interpretation upon interpretation. What begins as a simple impression in stone becomes a symbol of passage, of secrecy, of forgotten builders. It is the spark that keeps people looking, keeps them returning. If this kind of measured mystery is your lane, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us where your eye lands, stacked by design, sculpted by time, or something in between. And when you're ready for another careful walk through a legend, tap the next video cued on your screen.